Hello and welcome. Another edition, Coach's Corner. Every single week, take a few minutes, talk with some coaches. We're in season, busy time of year. A lot of parents looking for NCAA Division III discussion, and what I call the first family of Division III, especially in the Great Northeast in New England, the Casey family. And today we're going to be joined by head coach at the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut, Brian Casey. Brian, thank you so much. I know it's busy time of year, but I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
Absolutely, Walter. Thanks for having me. Caught me in between a couple midweek games this week, so it's really fun. Well,
Well, I wanted to track one of you guys down because if I have a question on Division III baseball, ask a Casey. You can't go wrong. Obviously, the old man, 40 years at Tufts, now at Johnson and Wales with your brother, and you have Johnson and Wales. We have WPI and Coast Guard Academy. A lot of parents are looking for insight about, is it one of the academies like West Point, Annapolis, Air Force? How hard is it to get in? But let's start with what makes the Coast Guard Academy special for a prospective student athlete.
yeah, a great question. I guess our main purpose as an academy is leadership and character development. So, just that in of itself is a unique experience, different than any other, or only a few others in the entire country. Look at West Point, Navy, Air Force. Some of our federal service academies. Like our job is to prepare future leaders. Some of these other high academic institutions, they're trying to prepare people to go out and do amazing things in respective fields and all that. But if you're looking for a workshop that's sole purpose is to develop leaders, this is the one of the very few places that's what we try to do. So when our graduates leave and they head out into the fleet, they are commissioning as officers. So they're going to go out and have a job, have responsibility. They're going to lead other young people to carry out, their mission, relative to what they are responsible for doing, in service of this country. So it's a very unique setup. And our guys will commission for at least 5 years. We're very unique in that. I believe the latest numbers are over 83% of ours re-up after 5. So they are in careers that they enjoy and progressing along and being promoted and working up the chain, if you will, and doing some pretty amazing things. But if you're 25, 26, 27 years old at the end of that first 5 years and you're off to have your second career, which many young people now are doing in the job market where they're not really in this for 30 or 40 years and retire, they're doing a bunch of things. The leadership development, the responsibilities that you have, the career experiences, when you walk into that quote unquote second career, that resume is going to stand out for a bunch of different reasons that aren't just, I went to school I did this entry level job and I worked my way up one spot. You're sort of coming out in a much different place of people in similar age ranges, with leadership skills and, having responsibilities that very few people have. So it's a tremendous opportunity. Quite frankly, while it's not something that I really knew much about when I was in high school and even in college, and then when this opportunity presented itself a couple of years ago to come here and be the head coach, diving into a little bit, it's amazing. I think more people need to spend the time looking into, not just the academy options, but also all the other options to figure out more, because it's, I'm sure we'll talk about, it can't just be a baseball decision and what these sort of 4 years set you up for in life after baseball, which is certainly much longer than your baseball career. So it's a tremendous place. We've got tremendous kids, tremendous people, and they do some really cool things that set them up for, life beyond here.
And as I alluded to earlier in the conversations, and one of the reasons why I was excited to speak with you, Brian, is because your dad has been a Division III head coach. We call him the grandfather of Division III baseball here in the Northeast. But you were a student athlete at Tufts. You've been a Division III student athlete. Now you're a Division III head coach. And a lot of people across the country aren't as familiar as we are, being from the Northeast or Mid Atlantic type area, East Coast, about NCAA Division III, the caliber of play and the quality of the student athletes. Can you talk a little bit about the grit and the the level of play at the NCAA Division III level, it's certainly not less than any other division across college baseball.
Yeah, it's good up here for sure, and I think a lot of it has to do demographically with how we're set up, right? So the scholarship level, or what used to be the scholarship level for the pre-NLI days, right, was other areas of the country had more schools, more programs that were was athletic scholarship that sort of gave you that opportunity. If you were a student athlete looking to play at the next level, and the academic piece was really important to your decision making, you had to go where the best schools were. We're all jam packed up here in the Northeast and Mid Atlantic, so that's where more, Division III opportunities are, per capita, if you will. And now, that's where all the best, baseball programs are for the Division III, because we're all kind of in the same area. So it's a dogfight week in and week out, playing up here. I know with the recent COVID and the extra eligibility stuff that we've been dealing with the last couple of years, in our conference alone, we've had, double digit guys that have played there 4 years, in the NUMAC, and then use their extra year eligibility playing at Division I schools. We have a couple guys that are, playing for Northeastern now that were in this conference a year ago that are having tremendous years and helping them have an awesome year that they're having at the Division I level. So there's good baseball wherever you are. Maybe you get a little bit more time to develop. Maybe you need more time to develop, and the Division III route is more appropriate for that, especially with the roster turnover that's happening now, faster and faster each year. But for me, Walt, I've always answered the same way. Like Division I, Division II, Division III, like I don't think that carries as much weight as does the place care about baseball, right? I think that's the more important question, because if baseball is really important to you and you want to have a really good experience, you need to go where people care about it as much as you do, right? And that's the stuff that needs to align. Your view of, or your value of the baseball experience and what the school is going to provide you, on top of other things that are going to be important in making that decision. So, you know, we care about baseball. There's a lot of programs up here that care about baseball, and it's no surprise of why they're good and competitive year in, year out. And that's what makes playing at this level fun, or playing in this region a lot of fun. We got two NCAA regions, Region I and Region II, that each and every year they're among the mix of the top programs in the country, and you get to play them week in and week out. It makes for a really cool, competitive experience, up here in this region for Division III.
I always try to explain to parents, with the exception of maybe depth on the bump or the bullpen, on any team in New England, regardless of level, can probably compete with Mike at Coach Glavin at Northeastern, Todd at BC. The one difference is the depth on the arm component. So the caliber and the quality of baseball, literally, whether we're talking Coast Guard, whether we're talking Babson or Salve or Endicott. And that kind of leads me, and you touched a little bit on the NUMAC, which is the New England Women and Men's Athletic Conference. It is loaded. You're talking about schools like Babson, MIT, Wheaton. I mean, these Salve, these are really strong athletic and academic programs. And I would love for you to just kind of explain. Division III is more about a balance for a student, meaning it's more than just baseball, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's a social, academic, it's a culture, a campus environment, allowing the student athlete to be a part of that. But the NUMAC, one could make an argument, is one of the strongest baseball conferences, top to bottom, in the country.
Yeah, again, I think I spent 8+ years at the Division I level at William Mary before I came here. There's certainly a physical difference, and some of that might be where they are in high school when they're actually going through the
Right.
recruiting process, where kids might be a little bit more physically enhanced at that point. That's what gives them some of those higher level opportunities. And some guys might need a little bit more time to develop, and they get that at 18, 19, 20 years old at the college level. Maybe a Division III where now they're becoming the best version of themselves at this level and compete at this level. And that's why the caliber of baseball is so good. Yeah, I mean, our conference is really, really, really strong. It's really good baseball. It's really competitive. I think it speaks a lot to, the coaches in this conference and what they do with their respective programs and how they develop players and all that. But to your point, yeah, it is a balance, and I think when everybody's going through their process to figure out sort of where do I want to go, Where can I play? The fit stuff gets talked about a lot. And you want to make a decision where it's not just about baseball. Like baseball is probably going to enhance that decision. It might be a tiebreaker for you in some cases. Certainly recruiting is a two-way street. Like you might really want to recruit a school because you love, X, Y, and Z about it. But if the coach isn't recruiting you, right, you're setting yourself up to go there for other reasons and maybe baseball, walk on opportunity or otherwise. So, it is about, what's this degree going to do for me demographically, how the school is set up. Does it fit sort of what I'm looking for? Am I going to be comfortable at that school and the opportunities it provides me? Academically, does it fit what I'm looking for in terms of what I want to study or the road I want to go down? And then obviously the baseball component has its piece in there and being a fit for the baseball coach, that program, and what they're looking to bring in. So I think Division III gives you that sort of holistic um, experience that we talked about years ago when I was in high school in terms of what you're looking for in a school. Like, you obviously want to play competitive baseball, and the fit's going to be determined by what you do on the field and what coaches see in you. But you have to, feel good about the other pieces of the place because you want to be good with everything that place provides you, not just the baseball piece. Because back then, like transferring wasn't is something you did when you were unhappy. Like it wasn't a
Right.
fit, it wasn't so easily readily available to us, back in those days. So now it's that much easier. So you want to make sure that you're finding a place that is comfortable for you, and it's not just the baseball component. Although that obviously is an important part of it, but it's one of many. And if it's the only reason, you deal with more of that transfer piece or trying to find a better fit through that experience of, hey, this isn't quite what I thought it was going to be. Or if the baseball stuff doesn't work out, do I still want to be here? Is this still the degree that I have value in all that type of stuff? So there's a lot of components that go into it. And I think, to your question, like our conference, the schools, the setup, the baseball programs, they are very attractive opportunities, which brings in quality student athletes. And then you get in the field, you got to settle it on the field, and it makes a very competitive conference to be a part of.
What I try to explain when I'm speaking with parents and student athletes in particular with regard to academics, one of the things one could make an argument that some of the top universities and colleges in the country or considered in the world are based in the the greater Northeast area, and they are Division III programs. Obviously Tufts, the NESCAT schools, obviously the MITs, the Coast Guard Academy, Babson. You can make cases that they are top 30, 40, 50 colleges in the country from an academic and overall college experience. But I would like for you to kind of explain, and I know this, Tufts has had draft picks, Wheaton has had draft picks, and players that went on to play in the major leagues. We're not talking about significant step down from Division I to Division III, but when you're looking at a student athlete for Coast Guard Academy, roster spots, what type of athletes are jumping out at you? Are they multi-sport athletes? Are they versatile, play more than one position, et cetera? What is it that catches your eye as a potential student athlete for your roster?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're obviously in a unique spot for what we have to recruit at an academy with some of the demands of the school and some of that stuff. We have a medical qualification that everyone's got to go through. So there's certain things where you could be a really good baseball player. The analogy I make is you could be Randy Johnson throwing 95 miles an hour. And, if you have a peanut allergy, it's not going to work out here no matter how good you are, right? So there's some unique pieces to us here. But typical of the baseball skill evaluation piece. We obviously want guys that are strong, guys that can run, guys that can field, guys that can throw, guys that have a skill set that's going to fit our level. I think the biggest separator for us is, high character guys that like to compete. And you mentioned the multiple sport thing. We argue with this all the time because there are going to be some players out there that need to spend more time in the off season developing their game because skill wise, they're not quite to the level they need to be at to play at the college level. And that's probably a better investment of their time to continue to work at their game. For other guys, they need to get into other arenas and compete more. We're seeing more and more skilled players getting to the college level that when the heat gets turned up, those skills aren't showing up as much, and they're just not in that competitive arena enough. Like I tell our hitters all the time, like our job is to make you into a good hitter, not build the perfect swing.
Right.
Like too many guys are developing themselves as a hitter just in a cage, and then they're not seeing that transfer over into the competitive environment, right? So, and again, for what we need for our evaluation for what we need guys that can hit and that guys that can compete. Same thing on the mound, like a bullpen versus a dummy hitter all the time, where you're not getting the feedback of a hitter standing in there. That pitch might look really good on a Rap soda machine, but when you get on there and that ball's getting tattooed or you're always in the middle of the plate, you don't pitch very much for us. You know what I mean? You got to be able to pitch. You got to be able to compete. Yesterday we played a game against Springfield, and we had to pitch ourselves out of way of 14 risky opportunity at bats where our guys need to make pitches. You know, it's a little different if you're just throwing the ball down the middle as hard as you can, and you might get away with that against some subpar hitters. But when you're playing in a really good league, you got to make pitches. The ball's got to move. You got to change speeds. You got to do a lot of different things. So I think it's important for guys to compete. So if we ever can get to an opportunity where we can evaluate that, high school playoff games, summer league playoff games, camp environments, if it allows it to, we're trying to evaluate guys not just for their physical ability and obviously they're fit for our academy, but then the competitive piece is really important. So I would say one of the biggest transitions that I've made as a coach is our falls when we get out in the field. A lot of it is sort of skill development time, getting a chance to experiment, do some stuff. But we certainly try to compete a lot more than we did maybe 10 years ago. We had guys that were playing 3 sports or 2 sports and competing that much more that, it was sort of we needed to pull back the harness of the horse rather than quack the whip to get it going. So getting our guys to feel comfortable performing in that competitive environment is huge, and it's becoming more and more of a separator, especially with the caliber of skill that's certainly developing at the lower levels. You got to get that to transfer over to the competitive environment because that's what we get evaluated on. So that to me is a huge separator in what we look for in the process.
And I think this is tremendous information for athletes and parents of those athletes to understand being a competitor at the college level is a quantum leap from your high school. In high school, you might have to go through a really dangerous 3 or 4, maybe 5 hitter, but in college, generally, you're going through 9 guys that can put barrels on baseballs. You have to compete the inner half, the outer half. You have to be able to locate throwing a ball where you want. You have to make routine plays all the time. You have to execute. And that whole execution piece brings me to really what makes the Coast Guard Academy really special, because it's not for everyone. And when I say that, I mean, it's hard to get into the Coast Guard Academy. So from an academic perspective, whether it's test scores, I don't know if you're test optional or not, what does it take and how does one approach? Is there a pre-read that has to be done? What type of process do athletes or students have to do in order to get into the Coast Guard Academy?
Yeah. Obviously, highly competitive, highly selective school. I think our admitted class, year to year, somewhere around 300, maybe a little over
Oof.
300 per class. Yeah, we're a smaller academy. We have just over 1,000 cadets here, so it's highly competitive, especially when you're talking about 20 plus Division III sports, including football and lacrosse from a male perspective. So there's few spots to sort of compete for. For getting recruits. So yeah, we obviously get guidance from our admissions people here in terms of what they're looking for in the academic, side of things. Certainly the transcript, extracurriculars, leadership experience, volunteerism, community service. That stuff all plays its role at a place where service is an element, and being a part of something bigger than yourself is certainly a core component of this place. Honor, respect, devotion to duty is our sort of core 3 principles. So you got to sort of check all those boxes as well. So if you got a track record of not doing those things in high school, it's going to be hard to hide that when you go through the admissions process here. But the unique thing about us is, we have 9 majors here. 5 of them are STEM or engineering based. The other 4 are leadership, management, science based. But all of our guys need to have prerequisite of the STEM classes for their track record in high school. So if we can get in there early in the process to educate them on that, that's a big separator for us. So they want to see chemistry, they want to see physics, and they want to see calculus on high school transcripts as a measure of academic readiness for the academy. So, if we have guys that are going to their senior year that haven't taken those classes, it's going to be really difficult to get through the admissions process because it's hard to determine, hey, are they prepared for the curriculum here, whether they're a management major or a chemical engineer or what have you. They need to have sort of some of that stuff. Yes, we use our test scores, SATs and ACTs. The simple answer is the better you can do, the easier it is for us. I think the average, again, not for this class that's currently going through the process, but dating back, all of them are 1,200 plus, 27, 28 plus on the ACT with, again, higher math than verbal is easier than higher verbal and lower math when we're talking about the split just relative to our curriculum. So there's some unique pieces to that. But like any high academic school, taking higher rigor classes, performance in those classes is important. And a lot of the extracurricular stuff comes in because you're in a demographic of all high achieving students. So then it's like what separates you. Baseball obviously is a component of that. So we have the ability to impact the process for the guys that we were recruiting here. Unfortunately, I'm not the final say, so we got to make sure that people that are in the room that are making the decisions feel the same way about them as we do when we're screening them in the process. So, but baseball certainly is a piece of that puzzle. And like I said, baseball is obviously very important to me, right? I wouldn't be coaching here if it wasn't important to our academy and to people here. And in terms of the leadership piece, right? The athletic arena is a really important part to developing leaders, just like it is in all of our other sports. So our academy looks at college athletics as a way to help develop leaders. So athletics here is actually looked at as co-curricular, not extracurricular. So that's a huge component for us. So our guys get excused from class to play baseball, to travel, all that type of stuff. They got to manage both sides of it. So it is a big part of the leadership development. So our place is set up for our people to achieve high in both.
I was going to ask a different question, but you just touched on a topic, and I would really like to squeeze this question in. I know we're impinging on your time, and I appreciate you taking the time to share this great information with families. But you mentioned community, extracurricular, volunteerism, things of that nature. That gets lost. And a lot of parents and a lot of student athletes start talking about metrics and analytics, and, they obviously throw their grades out there, transcript, but over and above that, at the end of the day, one of the things that Division III schools do emphasize is community, being a part of the student and faculty on campus, volunteering, giving back. Can you just talk about why that's important for young athletes, high school athletes, to be aware of as part of who they are, and when they go through the admissions process, when there is challenges with regard to looking for small separators, how large of a role that can play with regard to admissions at the higher level academic institutions?
Yeah. It's obviously all relative, right? So if you are a high achieving academic student that's well above the profile of the school that you're looking at, they're probably going to give you merit money to attract you there. They might have you come in and teach a class if you're well above that. All that type of stuff where that stuff might not matter as much. Now, if you're kind of measured up with a bunch of other applicants that are, of similar academic success, then that's where that stuff is going to play more important role relative to what's important to the school. So sometimes you got to do a little bit of research to figure out what's the mission of the school, what's their mission statement, what do they do, and how do those things sort of align with the resume that you're trying to put forth. So when there's people in the room that are reading your application and reading your resume, hey, is this something that we want here to enrich our campus? The college admissions process is extremely subjective. It's not objective. There are human beings in a room, reading applications and resumes and essays to determine who they want to give those opportunities to. So your job as an applicant is to make yourself as valuable as possible so people want to give you that opportunity. So for the ones that are more selective, you gotta put in that effort to kind of build that resume so it's not just, a transcript, a GPA, and that's it. You want to kind of make yourself as holistic as possible because it's highly competitive. Um, so yeah, that stuff I think all has its place, all has its purpose. Again, it's when you're going through your high school process, there's a lot of things that take up your time and carve out a piece of the pie. But if it's important to you, you got to find a way to get it in there to make yourself more desirable to a college campus. Generally is how I would put it.
And the last question, Brian, is what time of year do you generally have camps, and are you using your camps as a evaluation / recruiting tool? And is that something that you feel is important for a prospective student athlete to kind of dip their toe in the water, meet you and your staff, as well as see the campus in action?
Yeah, 100%. I think camps certainly have a lot of value. Especially if you've done your due diligence ahead of time to know what you're looking for in terms of not just the baseball program but the school in general. As many times as we can get eyes on guys, we want to try to do that, especially with the guys that we are seriously interested in. Because again, unfortunately we're in a sport where the evaluation process, you don't always see everything you need to see. If I go to a high school game and I'm watching an outfielder, if the ball never gets hit to him, it's hard to make an evaluation. Or if he never sees a pitch that, near the zone, it's hard to evaluate that, uncontrolled environment, right? So camps give us a little bit more control of that so we can evaluate what we want to see. But we're also trying to see our guys in a variety of settings because our sport is a little bit different to evaluate than a football skill combine or a basketball game where you can see everything happen within a 20-minute half, so it's a little bit different. Fortunately, we actually are just getting our camp system off the ground. Institutionally, we are now set up to do that. So we're kind of getting that piece rolling. So we're going to be shooting to have our first, prospect camps this next calendar year. But otherwise, we're a national school, so we're out and about on the road a ton. Myself and my two assistants, we're certainly at the other service academy camps, Army, Navy, Air Force. We're at all their prospect camps in the summer because that's sort of the niche that we need to be at. But we're in Georgia, we're in New Jersey, we're at some of those big tournaments. We're all over the place. We're at some of those national academic opportunities. So we're out and about. What I tell guys that we're communicating with, especially this time of year, is send us your high school schedule, send us your summer schedules. We're going to let you know where we're going to be. If you have, deciding between a couple different opportunities, just reach out and ask me, and I'll tell you where we're going to be. We're not going to hide from you because there's a lot of opportunities out there. So my advice is to parents is obviously it can cost a pretty penny to do all these things. You got to do a little bit of your legwork ahead of time and make sure that it's educated decisions that you're making relative to where you're going to go. So is the school a fit? Do they have an interest in you? Is this the first time they're seeing you, or is this going to be the second or third time? And sort of how that recruiting conversations have evolved. Those are all going to impact sort of what's going to be the best cost benefit for you to get out and be in front of coaches. You don't want to go somewhere that's not a fit athletically, or the coaches aren't showing interest, or any of that type of stuff. So you want to make sure it's worth your while.
Well, we're going to make sure in the Blue Book that we have everything related to Coast Guard Academy, Coach Brian Casey, with all of his contact information, social media links. We'll make sure that when the camps are announced, all of that information will be available on the Blue Book app. All of the contact information, not only for Coach Casey, but his staff and everything to do with their schedule. I strongly, strongly recommend if you're in the area, try to coordinate and facilitate attending a game. Really, it's a great opportunity for you to see the team in action, the conference play in action, obviously the coaching staff. But we'll have all that information in the description, both in the podcast and here on the YouTube video. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Greatly appreciate you taking the time, and best of luck the rest of the way.
Thanks, Walt. Appreciate having me.